Lena Carter stood in front of her bedroom mirror, the faint morning light touching the edges of her face. The clock showed 8:10 a.m., and the quiet hum of the washing machine was the only sound in the house. Her husband, Mark, had already left for his job at the auto shop, and the house felt unusually still. She liked mornings like this, peaceful, predictable, calm. But deep inside, that same quiet also reminded her of something missing. It had been 7 years since she married Mark. In the beginning, life had been full of laughter, long drives, and shared dreams. But over time, the warmth had faded. Mark had grown distant, often tired and distracted. Their conversations had turned practical about bills, groceries, or errands. Nothing more. Lena loved him, but she often felt invisible. It's like someone walking beside him rather than with him. That morning, she tried to distract herself with chores. She folded clean laundry, sorted towels, and brewed coffee. She told herself everything was fine, just another quiet day in their small town of Maple Creek. But that peace was broken in a way she could never have expected. Mark's son from his first marriage, Ryan, was coming home for a weekend visit. He was 22, a senior studying architecture in Chicago, and Lena hadn't seen him for almost a year. When she married Mark, Ryan had been a quiet teenager, polite but cautious, unsure how to accept a new woman in his father's life. Over the years, their relationship had softened. He started calling her by her name instead of Dad's wife, and sometimes he'd ask her for advice. She liked him. He had a kind, respectful nature, a bit shy but genuine. She wanted his visit to feel warm, welcoming, and perfect. She baked his favorite muffins the night before, cleaned the guest room, and placed a small vase of wildflowers by the window. She hoped he'd notice. That morning, Lena was in her bedroom, changing out of her house robe after spilling coffee on it. She pulled off the blouse she'd been wearing and reached for another one. The curtains were drawn and she thought she was alone. The house had that stillness she'd grown used to. But just as she slipped out of her blouse, she heard the sound of the front door. "Dad, you home?" The voice came from downstairs, familiar, but she hadn't heard it in months. Her heart jumped. It was Ryan. Her mind froze for a second. He wasn't supposed to arrive until the evening. Before she could say anything, the sound of footsteps came closer, fast, heavy, moving straight toward the bedroom. "Ryan, wait." She called, but it was too late. The door opened. And Ryan stood there, suitcase in hand, his expression stunned. For a split second, time stopped. He looked as surprised as she felt. Lena gasped, grabbed her blouse, and quickly pulled it across her chest. "Oh my God, Ryan!" she blurted out, her face burning with embarrassment. I'm sorry," he stammered, stepping back so fast he almost dropped his bag. "I didn't know you were, I thought." Lena couldn't help but laugh nervously, partly out of shock. "It's okay, really. I just wasn't expecting you this early. Took an earlier bus," he said, still flustered, his ears turning red. "I wanted to surprise Dad. Guess I surprised the wrong person?" Her laughter softened the awkwardness. "You definitely did," she said, quickly buttoning her blouse. "But it's fine, Ryan. Don't worry." He nodded, still looking mortified. I'll just take my stuff to the guest room." When he left, Lena sat on the edge of her bed for a moment, catching her breath. Her heart was still racing, not from shame, but from the sudden shock of being seen. Not in a scandalous way, but as a person again, visible, real, later. She found him in the kitchen, unpacking some things he had brought from the city. "Truce?" he asked, holding up a bag of her favorite cookies. Lena smiled, amused by his attempt to make things less awkward. "You didn't have to do that." "Consider it my apology," he said, grinning a little. They both laughed, and the tension between them melted away. They sat down for breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee. The conversation started small but soon flowed naturally. Ryan told her about his classes, his dream of designing sustainable buildings, and how he'd started cooking on weekends to save money. She listened, genuinely interested, noticing how much he'd changed. He wasn't the unsure teenager she remembered. He had confidence now, a calmness in how he spoke. "You sound like someone who's grown up," she said with a smile. "I had to," he replied. College kind of forces that on you. Lena nodded thoughtfully. I guess it does. For a while, they sat in comfortable silence. The sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, lighting the dust in the air like glitter. Lena realized how rare it was for her to have such easy company. Mark was usually quiet, tired from work, and uninterested in long conversations. But Ryan asked questions, listened, and laughed easily. It reminded her what warmth felt like. As the morning turned into afternoon, they unpacked groceries together. He told stories from the city about late-night projects and funny professors. She told him about Maple Creek, the new neighbors, and how Mark had been working too much again. There was no tension, no discomfort, just familiarity. Like they'd known each other for years. When Mark finally returned home that evening, he was surprised to see Ryan already there. "You're early," he said, patting his son on the back. "Couldn't wait," Ryan replied with a grin. "Wanted to get Mom's cooking?" Lena smiled at the word Mom. He didn't mean it literally, but it still warmed her heart. Dinner was lively. Ryan talked, Mark laughed, and for a brief moment, everything felt whole again, like the family Lena had always wanted. But that night, when Lena went to bed, sleep didn't come easily. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the day. That small, awkward morning moment kept replaying in her mind. Not because of what it was a misunderstanding, but because of what it revealed. She had been seen by someone again, even for a second. And it reminded her how long she'd been living unseen. She wasn't angry or ashamed. She just felt aware of how empty her marriage had quietly become, aware of how little warmth her days carried, aware that sometimes life shakes you in small, strange ways just to remind you that you're still alive the next day. She'd wake up to a new kind of tension, not inappropriate but emotional, because Ryan wasn't just visiting to say hello. He had come home with something on his mind, something that had been weighing on him for months. And what he'd soon tell her about his father would turn her quiet world upside down. The morning after Ryan's unexpected arrival, Lena woke to the sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. For a moment, she felt warmth, the kind she hadn't felt in years. She got up, put on her robe, and walked downstairs. Ryan was sitting at the table eating toast while Mark stood by the counter scrolling through his phone. It was a normal family scene, but Lena noticed how quickly Mark's smile faded when he looked up at her. He nodded, said a quick morning, and went back to reading his messages. That small gesture stung more than she wanted to admit. Ryan noticed. "You okay, Lena?" he asked quietly after Mark left for work. She nodded, trying to sound cheerful. "Of course. Why wouldn't I be?" He didn't press, but his eyes said he knew better. The day moved slowly. Lena busied herself with house chores while Ryan offered to help her clean the backyard. They worked side by side under the cool spring sun, raking leaves and chatting about little things. Her garden, his college life, and the difference between city noise and small-town silence. But after a while, their laughter faded, and Ryan's expression changed. He set down the rake, hesitated, then said softly, "Can I ask you something? Personal." Lena looked at him, a bit surprised. "Of course. What's on your mind?" He seemed to search for words before speaking. "When was the last time you and Dad? I mean, when did you two last really talk? Like honestly, talk." The question caught her off guard. "I don't know," she said after a pause. "It's been a while, I guess. He's been busy. You know how he gets." Ryan sighed. "Yeah, that's what I thought." There was something heavy in his voice, something he wasn't saying. She frowned slightly. "Why do you ask?" He leaned against the fence, looking down. "Because, Lena, I don't think you know what's been going on with him." Her heart tightened. "What do you mean?" Ryan hesitated again, clearly torn. "I shouldn't even be the one telling you this, but I can't just keep quiet anymore." He took a deep breath. "I think Dad's been seeing someone else." The words hit her like a sudden wind. For a moment, she didn't understand. She just stared at him. Ryan continued, his voice low and careful. "I didn't want to believe it either, but I saw messages on his phone when he visited me in Chicago a few months ago. They weren't appropriate. They were from someone named Claire, and there were photos. Not bad ones, but still it was obvious. Lena's mind started spinning. Are you sure? Maybe it's a coworker or just a friend. No, Ryan said firmly. It wasn't like that. He was different with her. He even left our dinner early one night because she called. That's when I knew something was wrong. Lena stood still, her breath caught in her throat. The sound of birds and wind around them faded into silence. Ryan stepped closer, regret in his eyes. I didn't want to tell you like this. I just thought you deserved to know. She swallowed hard, forcing a small nod. Thank you for being honest, Ryan. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. She tried to gather her thoughts, but emotions came in waves. Confusion, hurt, disbelief. It wasn't anger yet, just deep sadness. She had trusted Mark completely. He wasn't perfect, but she'd believed his distance came from exhaustion, not betrayal. She sat on the porch steps, her hands trembling slightly. Ryan sat beside her. I'm so sorry, he said quietly. You've always been kind to me. You don't deserve this. She smiled faintly, though her eyes were wet. Life isn't always fair, Ryan. Sometimes we just love the wrong way. He looked at her, his expression soft and worried. You shouldn't blame yourself. They sat together in silence, watching the sunlight move across the grass. For Lena, the world suddenly felt heavier, yet strangely clearer. She saw the signs she'd ignored. Mark's late nights, his cold replies, his constant checking of messages when he thought she wasn't looking. She convinced herself it was just stress. But maybe her heart had known the truth all along. Later that evening when Mark returned home, Lena tried to act normal. She cooked dinner, smiled when he spoke, and asked about his day. But every word from his mouth felt like a shadow. He talked about work, the new clients, and how tired he was. The same routine conversations that had filled their years together. After dinner, Mark went upstairs to take a shower, and Ryan helped Lena clear the table. She noticed he was watching her, concerned. I'll be fine, she said softly. You don't have to worry about me. Kay shook his head. I do worry. You've been there for me more than my dad has sometimes. I don't like seeing you hurt. His words touched something deep inside her. She looked at him, realizing how much he'd grown, not just in age, but in empathy. There was a quiet strength in him, the kind she wished Mark still had, that night. After everyone had gone to bed, Lena lay awake again. The clock ticked, the wind whispered outside, and her mind refused to rest. She thought about confronting Mark, but the thought of hearing the truth scared her. She wasn't ready to break what was left of their life together, not yet. The next morning, Mark left early again, claiming he had to meet a client in the next town. Lena watched him drive away, the ache in her chest growing heavier. When she turned around, Ryan was standing by the doorway with a cup of coffee. Did you sleep? He asked gently. Not really, she admitted. He handed her the cup. Then you need this. She smiled faintly. Thank you. They sat in the kitchen again, just like the day before. But this time, there was a new kind of silence, deeper, more understanding. Finally, Ryan said, you know, when Mom left Dad, I was angry at her for a long time. I thought she just gave up on him. But now I see. He's the one who gives up on people. He stops trying when things get real. Lena looked down, tracing the rim of her cup. Maybe that's his way of escaping. Maybe, Ryan said quietly. But that doesn't make it right. There was a pause. Then he added, you deserve someone who sees you, who actually listens. Dad doesn't see how lucky he is. Those words stayed with her. Someone who sees you. She realized that was what she had been craving all along, to be noticed. Valued, loved, without condition. The rest of the day passed slowly. Ryan offered to drive her to the grocery store, and on the way back, they stopped by the lake. The air was crisp, and the water sparkled under the sun. They sat on a bench, neither talking much. But Lena felt something shift, a strange comfort. A closeness built on shared pain rather than romance. She saw Ryan glance at her once, his expression gentle, not pitying, but protective. It made her heart ache in a different way. Not romantic, but human. He reminded her of what kindness felt like. When they got home, Mark was already there, pretending to be cheerful. "You two had a busy day?" he asked casually. "Just errands," Lena replied. Mark nodded, distracted as always. His phone buzzed on the counter, and he quickly turned it face down. That small, nervous motion confirmed everything Ryan had said. Lena didn't need proof anymore. She saw it in his eyes, in his guilt. That night, she stood by the window looking out at the dark yard. Ryan came downstairs quietly and saw her there. "You okay?" he asked again, his voice low. She nodded. "Just thinking. About Dad." "Yes. And about what comes next." Ryan stepped closer. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you. You're family to me, Lena, always." His words made her chest tighten. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, truly seen. When she went to bed that night, she didn't cry. She felt something else instead. Strength. The kind that comes when you finally stop pretending everything's fine. Tomorrow, she decided, she would ask Mark the truth. And whatever his answer was, her life would never be the same again. The next morning began quietly, almost too quietly. Lena woke up early, before sunrise, and stood by the kitchen window, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. Her thoughts were loud, her heartbeat restless. Today she would finally confront Mark. She had rehearsed what she'd say in her mind a dozen times during the night. But every version felt wrong. Part of her wanted to shout, part of her wanted to cry, and another part, the tired part, just wanted peace. When she heard Mark's footsteps coming down the stairs, her pulse quickened. He appeared in the doorway, looking as if nothing was wrong. He smiled faintly, poured himself coffee, and kissed her on the cheek out of habit. That simple act felt almost cruel now. "Morning," he said. "You're up early." She looked at him, steady but calm. "We need to talk, Mark." He froze for a moment, then set his cup down slowly. "All right," he said, trying to sound casual. "About what?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a breath and said quietly, "About Claire." The name hit him like a stone. His eyes flickered, his shoulders stiffened. He didn't say anything for several seconds. Finally, he exhaled. "Who told you?" "It doesn't matter," Lena said softly. "I just want to know the truth." Mark rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding her gaze. "It's complicated." "And make it simple," she replied. "Were you seeing her?" He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "It wasn't serious," he said quickly, as if that would lessen the damage. "It just happened. I was stressed, lonely, things between us felt." "Don't," Lena interrupted gently, her voice trembling but firm. "Don't make excuses. Just tell me why." He looked at her finally, guilt written all over his face. "Because I felt invisible, Lena. You stopped talking to me. Everything became routine. Work, dinner, sleep. It's like we were living next to each other, not together." Lena felt the tears sting, but didn't let them fall. "And you think betrayal fixes that?" "I didn't plan it," Mark said quickly. "It just happened. I swear, it didn't mean anything." She took a deep breath. "That's what hurts most, that it didn't mean anything. You threw away trust for something meaningless." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Ryan, who had been upstairs, heard raised voices and came halfway down the stairs but stopped, not wanting to intrude. He could hear every word. Mark sat down, his hands gripping his coffee mug like an anchor. "Lena, please, I'm sorry. I'll end it. I already have. It was a mistake, okay? I want to fix this." But Lena shook her head. "You can't fix something by pretending it didn't happen." He reached out, but she stepped back. "Don't," she said quietly. "Just don't." Ryan came down the rest of the stairs now, slowly. "Dad," he said carefully, "you need to give her space." Mark turned to him sharply. "You told her, didn't you?" Ryan didn't back down. "She deserved to know." "You were lying to her." Mark's tone rose. "You had no right. Neither did you." Ryan interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "You hurt her. And I'm not going to watch you pretend it's nothing. Lena stepped between them. Stop, both of you. This isn't about blame anymore. She turned to Mark again. I don't want to fight. I just need to understand, were you unhappy? Or were you just careless? Mark sighed heavily. Maybe both, he admitted. I didn't stop to think what I was risking until it was too late. Lena looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, You risked the only person who still believed in you. That broke him more than shouting ever could. She walked past him, needing air. Outside, the world looked calm, the sun rising over the trees, the same street she had walked every morning for years. But everything inside her had shifted. Ryan followed her outside after a few minutes. You okay? He asked softly. She nodded faintly, though her voice shook when she said, No, but I will be. They sat on the porch steps. She wrapped her sweater around her shoulders as a breeze passed through. It's strange, she said after a pause. You spend years building something thinking it's solid. Then, one secret makes it all feel like sand. Ryan looked at her, sadness in his eyes. You didn't do anything wrong. You gave him everything. Lena smiled weakly. Sometimes giving everything isn't enough when the other person stops trying. They sat quietly for a while. Ryan wanted to comfort her, but he also respected her silence. Finally, she turned to him. Thank you, Ryan, for being honest. For caring. He shook his head. You've always treated me like family. You deserved to know the truth. That evening, Mark tried again to talk. He came into the living room where Lena was sitting, watching the fire flicker. Please, Lena, he said softly, don't let this end us. We can go to counseling. We can work through it. She looked up at him, tired but composed. Do you really want to fix us? Or do you just want to feel better about what you did? He didn't answer. That's what I thought, she said. He started to speak again, but she stopped him with a raised hand. Mark, I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done pretending. Her calmness scared him more than her tears ever could. So what now? He asked. I need time, she said. Maybe I'll stay with my sister for a while. Maybe I'll come back. But right now, I need to find myself again. He tried to argue, but the look in her eyes told him it was over, at least for now. He nodded slowly, defeated. All right, he whispered. I'll give you space. That night, Lena packed a small bag. Ryan helped her carry it to the car. The air was cool and still, and the sky was filled with faint stars. Before she got in, she turned to Ryan. You'll be okay here. He nodded. Yeah, don't worry about me. You do what's best for you, she smiled, eyes glistening. You've grown into a good man, Ryan. Your mother would be proud. Because of you, he said simply. She reached up and hugged him, a warm, genuine hug filled with gratitude, not sadness. Take care of yourself, she whispered. I will, he said. And you take care of your heart. She nodded, then got into the car. As she drove away, the reflection of the porch light faded in her rearview mirror. For the first time in years, she felt both lost and free. The next morning, Mark sat at the kitchen table alone. He stared at the empty chair across from him, realizing what he'd truly lost. Ryan walked in quietly, made coffee, and sat down. Is she okay? Mark asked softly. Ryan nodded. She will be. She's stronger than you think. Mark looked down. No. I just wish I'd realized that sooner. Ryan didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Days turned into weeks. Lena stayed with her sister near the coast, spending her mornings walking along the beach, thinking, healing. Sometimes she would get texts from Mark, short apologies or updates, but she rarely replied. It wasn't out of bitterness. She just needed silence. Ryan visited her once before heading back to college. They walked along the shore, the wind brushing through their hair. I'm glad you left, he said. It's good for you. She smiled. It's scary too, but maybe sometimes we need to lose something to find ourselves again. He nodded. You'll be okay. I know, she said, her voice soft but steady. For the first time, I really believe that. When he hugged her goodbye, she felt proud of the boy who would become a man, and proud of herself for finally choosing peace over fear. Months later, Lena returned to her home in Maple Creek. The house felt different, quieter, emptier, but lighter somehow. Mark wasn't there. He had moved in with a friend temporarily, giving her space as promised. She walked through each room, touching familiar walls, memories flooding back. In the living room, she stopped by the fireplace where she and Ryan had once sat, talking about courage and truth. A small smile formed on her lips. She knew she couldn't rewrite the past. But she could start over, not for anyone else, but for herself. That night, she stood by the same window where she had once waited for Mark to come home. Now, she wasn't waiting for anyone. She looked out at the stars and whispered, "It's okay." And it was. Claire Weston's life looked ordinary from the outside, quiet, maybe even peaceful. But inside, she carried a silence that had weight. It had been 2 years since her husband Daniel passed away. And even though everyone told her time would heal, time hadn't done much except make the world quieter. She still lived in their small apartment in Portland, Oregon, surrounded by reminders of what once was framed photos. Half-read books, the piano they used to play together. Every morning, Claire would make herself a single cup of coffee, open the curtains, and let the sunlight touch the dust floating in the air. Then, almost like a ritual, she'd sit at the piano. Her fingers would hover over the keys, hesitant, before pressing down gently. The music she played was soft, mournful, and honest. It was the language she used to speak to Daniel, the only way she knew how to keep him close. Her students adored her kindness. She taught children and adults, anyone who wanted to learn, but lately she'd stopped taking new students. It felt too heavy to open herself up to new faces, new stories. But one spring afternoon, something or someone changed. It was a Thursday when a tall man walked into her studio holding the hand of a young teenage girl. The girl was shy, maybe 14, with long brown hair and a nervous smile. The man introduced himself as Evan Carter, an architect who had recently moved into the neighborhood. His daughter Emily wanted to learn piano. Claire greeted them with her usual warmth, though her heart beat a little faster than usual. There was something about the man, not in the way of attraction, but familiarity. His eyes carried the same kind of quiet sadness she'd seen in her own mirror during the lesson. Claire noticed Evan sitting silently by the door, watching his daughter play. Most parents scrolled through their phones or left early, but he didn't. He sat still, listening as if every note mattered. When Emily finished, he stood and smiled. "You're very patient," he told Claire. "Your music feels peaceful." She smiled back, slightly embarrassed. "It's my therapy, I guess." He nodded. "I understand that." And with those 3 words, she knew he did. Over the next few weeks, Emily's lessons became a rhythm Claire looked forward to. Evan always came early and stayed late. Sometimes they'd talk about little things, music, work, the strange weather. Other times, they'd sit in comfortable silence. It was easy, natural, and somehow comforting. One rainy evening, Emily didn't come. Evan arrived alone. "She's not feeling well," he said, "but she told me to come anyway, to pay for the lesson." Claire laughed softly. "That's very responsible of her." He hesitated before asking, "Would it be strange if I stayed to listen anyway?" She hesitated too, but nodded. "Not strange at all." She sat at the piano, feeling his quiet presence behind her. When she began to play, the music filled the room with something fragile, sadness turning into warmth. She didn't know why she chose that song. It was one Daniel used to love, a melody that always made her cry. But this time, she didn't cry. When she finished, the silence was heavy but gentle. Evan spoke first. That sounded like someone saying goodbye. Claire's throat tightened. Maybe it was. Evan walked to the piano, stopping a few feet away. "I lost someone too," he said quietly. 3 years ago? My wife." The words hung between them, heavy but familiar. Claire met his eyes and saw it, the same kind of loss that had followed her for years. And just like that, 2 strangers were no longer strangers. That night, something shifted. When he left, she said softly, "Drive safe." He paused at the door, then smiled. Play again tomorrow. I think it helps. And he was right. Days passed and the lessons continued. Emily returned, healthy and cheerful, unaware of the silent connection that had formed between her father and her teacher. They didn't flirt, didn't cross any lines. It wasn't like that. It was deeper, quieter, a bond between two people learning how to breathe again. One afternoon, after Emily's lesson, Evan stayed to help Claire fix a broken curtain rod. It was such a simple thing, yet the moment felt strangely intimate. His hands were steady as he worked.
Okay.
And Claire found herself watching him. The concentration in his face, the calmness in his movements. When he caught her looking, she quickly turned away. "Sorry," she murmured. He chuckled. "You don't have to be." Later, as he left, she caught herself saying, "Don't stop coming." She said it without thinking, almost a whisper. He looked back, smiling softly. "I won't." After that day, his presence became part of her life, a steady rhythm like the ticking of a clock or the hum of rain. He'd bring coffee some mornings, sometimes flowers, never anything too much. They talked about music, architecture, and memories they didn't share with anyone else. For Claire, it was terrifying, the idea that she might be feeling something again. She would sit by her window at night, thinking of Daniel and feeling guilty for even smiling at another man. But then she remembered what Daniel used to say: "Don't let life stop because I'm gone." One evening, when Evan came to pick up Emily, it started to rain. Heavy, cold rain that blurred the windows. Emily ran ahead to the car, and Claire handed Evan an umbrella. "You'll get soaked," she said. He smiled. "I've been through worse." Something in the way he said it made her heart ache. He wasn't just talking about the weather. That night, Claire sat at the piano again. She played the same song she'd played the first night he stayed, but this time she wasn't playing for Daniel. She was playing for herself. For the woman who was still learning to live. As the notes faded, she realized she wasn't alone. Evan stood by the doorway, rain dripping from his coat, his eyes fixed on her. "I knocked," he said softly, "but you didn't hear." She stood, startled but not frightened. "What are you doing here?" "I forgot something," he said, though they both knew he hadn't. He took a step closer. "I didn't want the music to stop." Claire's heart pounded. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time in years, she saw not the shadow of loss, but the possibility of life beyond it. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. "You said don't stop coming," he whispered. Her voice trembled. "And you didn't." He shook his head. "I don't think I could, even if I tried." For a moment, the world felt still. Two souls caught between grief and hope, both afraid to break the fragile silence. Then Claire said something that even surprised her. "Promise me you won't stop." Evan looked at her, and there was no hesitation. "I promise." When he left that night, she didn't feel the usual emptiness that followed goodbyes. Instead, she felt something new, a quiet pulse of warmth, a spark of something that hadn't existed in her world for a long time. The next morning, she found herself smiling for no reason. She made 2 cups of coffee out of habit, even though she was alone. She knew what it meant. She was letting herself feel again, for the first time since Daniel's death. Claire Weston looked out at the morning sunlight and didn't feel the pain of yesterday. She felt the promise of tomorrow, but deep down, she also knew that love, especially love after loss, never came without its tests. And though she didn't know it yet, the promise she asked Evan to make would soon be tested in ways neither of them could have imagined. For now, though, the music continued, and so did they. Summer came early that year. Portland was brighter than usual, full of green trees and warm wind that made everything seem alive. Claire Weston felt that change too, for the first time in years. Her days didn't begin with emptiness. Evan Carter had quietly become part of her routine. Some mornings, he brought her coffee from the cafe down the street. Sometimes he stayed after Emily's piano lessons, helping fix things around the studio or just listening as Claire played. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words always landed softly, like a melody she didn't know she needed. Their friendship had become something delicate, unspoken, but deeply felt. They didn't call it love. Neither wanted to rush or even name it. But it was there in the small glances, in the laughter that filled the silence, and in the way they both started to look forward to each other's company more than either cared to admit. One Saturday, Evan showed up without Emily. "She's spending the weekend with her grandparents," he explained. "I thought I'd bring you lunch." "You forget to eat when you teach." Claire laughed, pretending not to blush. "You make it sound like you're keeping track." "Maybe I am," he said quietly. They ate together at the small round table in the corner of her studio. The food wasn't anything fancy, sandwiches and soup, but it felt special. When they finished, Claire began playing the piano again. Evan listened in silence, his hands folded, his eyes soft. After a while, he said, "You play like someone who's learned how to survive heartbreak." Claire's fingers paused on the keys. "Maybe that's because I have." He didn't press further, but in that quiet, something passed between them, a silent truth neither needed to say out loud. They were both survivors, both rebuilding from loss. Over the next few weeks, their connection grew. They started meeting outside the studio, at the farmer's market, at the park, sometimes just walking by the river and talking about life. Evan told her stories about his late wife, about how she used to hum while she cooked. Claire shared memories of Daniel, how he used to make her laugh by pretending to play the piano terribly off-key. Those memories didn't hurt as much now. Somehow, talking about them with Evan made them softer. Then one evening, everything changed. It was late, and thunder rolled in the distance. Emily's lesson had ended early, but Evan stayed behind to help Claire close up the studio. The storm broke suddenly, pouring rain against the windows. Claire laughed, standing by the glass. "Looks like we're stuck." Evan joined her. "Not the worst place to be stuck," he said. There was something in his tone, a warmth that made her heart flutter. For a moment, neither spoke. The rain drowned out the world outside. Claire turned toward him and saw it, the loneliness in his eyes, the same ache that had once belonged to her. "I don't know how you do it," she whispered. "After losing someone, I didn't think I'd ever be able to connect again." He looked at her. "Maybe we don't move on," he said. "Maybe we just move forward." That simple line stayed in her mind for days. But time, as it often does, brought change. Evan's architectural firm received an offer for a major project in Chicago. It was a big opportunity, something he had worked toward for years. When he told her, Claire tried to hide her disappointment. "That's incredible," she said, smiling tightly. He looked at her for a long moment. "It doesn't feel incredible." She forced a small laugh. "You'd be crazy to turn it down." "Maybe I'm already crazy," he said softly. She didn't answer. Neither did he. The silence between them was heavier than words could carry. That evening, after Emily left, Claire stayed late at the piano. The studio was empty except for the soft hum of the city outside. She played their song, the one he always asked her to play. Each note felt like goodbye. She didn't see Evan standing at the doorway until the song ended. "Claire," he said quietly, "I don't want to leave things like this." She turned toward him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Then how should we leave them?" He stepped closer, hesitant but certain. "Promise me something," she said suddenly. "Promise me you won't stop calling, or writing, or thinking about this, whatever this is." Evan reached for her hand, his voice trembling. "I won't stop. I promise." And he meant it. But promises, even when meant, are hard to keep. A week later, he left for Chicago. The first few weeks he called often. They talked about everything, his work, her students, Emily's progress. Every night she'd wait for his call, like she used to wait for Daniel's voice years ago. But slowly, life began pulling them in different directions. His calls became less frequent, his messages shorter. Claire told herself not to be foolish. People get busy. Time zones make it hard. Life moves on. But every night she sat at the piano, she heard his voice in her mind. "I won't stop." One morning she received a letter, handwritten with Evan's familiar handwriting. It said, "The days are long here. I miss the rain. I miss the quiet. And I miss you. More than I thought I would." She read that letter 100 times. It became her anchor. But as the months stretched on, the letters stopped coming too. The silence returned, heavy and painful. Like the years before he came into her life, one day Emily showed up for her lesson alone. She looked older, more distant. Claire asked about her father, trying to sound casual. "He's busy," Emily said. "He's barely home. I think he's trying to figure things out." That night, Claire didn't play the piano. She couldn't. She sat in the dark staring at the keys, feeling foolish for believing that love could return without breaking something again. Still, she refused to be angry. Deep down, she knew Evan hadn't forgotten her. He was just lost the same way she had once been. But the waiting was painful. One evening, she went for a walk by the river where they used to go. The air was cool and the sun was setting over the water. Couples passed her, holding hands, laughing. She felt both alone and strangely hopeful. Love, she thought, isn't about holding someone close. It's about believing they'll come back when the time is right. When she returned home, she opened the piano and began to play again. Slowly, the music returned. It wasn't the same as before. It carried a trace of sorrow, but also strength. She realized that even though Evan was gone, he had given her something she didn't know. She needed a reason to feel alive again. Weeks turned into months. Seasons changed. Claire continued to teach, continued to live. But her heart stayed quietly loyal to a promise whispered under a rainstorm. "I won't stop." One night in autumn, she sat by her window watching the leaves fall. She thought about writing to him, but decided against it. If he wanted to find her, he would. Some things couldn't be forced. Then a soft knock came at her door. She froze. No one ever visited that late. When she opened it, no one was there. Only an envelope lying on the doormat, her name written in Evan's handwriting. Her hands shook as she opened it. The first line made her heart stop. "I haven't forgotten. I just didn't know how to come back." Tears blurred her vision. He was still there somewhere, thinking of her. She read it again and again until the ink smudged under her fingers. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to remind her that love doesn't vanish with distance. It waits. That night, she whispered into the darkness. I begged him not to stop. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't. The next morning, she smiled for the first time in months. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew this. Her story with Evan wasn't over. And though miles separated them, the connection remained strong, unseen. And alive. What she didn't know was that the universe was already bringing him back into her life in a way she could never have predicted. Their unfinished song was waiting to be played again. Autumn returned to Vermont with its familiar crisp air and red leaves painting the hills. It had been 6 months since Evan left for Chicago. The house was quiet again, but not empty. Margaret had filled her days with gardening, book clubs, and early morning walks. She smiled more easily now. Sometimes, when the wind rattled the windows, she would glance toward the porch, half expecting to see him fixing something, his sleeves rolled up, his quiet concentration steadying the whole world. But he was gone, living his own life, and that was how it was meant to be. One late afternoon, as Margaret sorted mail at the kitchen counter, she noticed an envelope with unfamiliar handwriting. Chicago postmark. Her heart gave a small, surprised beat. She opened it carefully. Dear Margaret, I hope the garden's still winning its fight against the frost. The city's busier than I imagined, but I'm doing well. I started working part-time at a museum and studying architecture. You were right, sometimes rebuilding begins when you least expect it. I wanted you to know that your words, your patience, and your stories still guide me here. I'm grateful. Evan. Margaret sat down slowly. She hadn't realized how much she'd needed those words. She smiled, folded the letter neatly, and placed it in her old music box, the same one that once held her wedding ring, that night. She stepped outside and looked at the stars. The wind was sharp, but peaceful. She whispered softly, He's doing fine. Weeks passed and more letters came, not often, just enough to fill the quiet. Evan wrote about classes, his small apartment, the people he met. He described the city lights and how they reminded him of the porch lantern they used to fix together. Margaret replied every few weeks, writing about her garden, the neighbors, and how the house had become her friend again. It wasn't romance. It was connection, pure and human. They both knew that some relationships were not meant to last forever, but still shaped everything that came after. One snowy morning, she received another letter, but this one was different. Margaret, I met someone. Her name is Claire. She's kind and she listens the way you do. I wanted you to know because I think you'd like her. I hope that's okay. Margaret read the words twice. A soft ache moved through her chest, but it wasn't sadness, it was peace. She smiled, closed the letter, and whispered, "Good for you, Evan." She went outside to brush snow off the porch railings, her breath misting in the cold. She looked up at the sky and felt something deep, pride, warmth, and gratitude that she had been part of someone's healing journey. That spring, Lily visited again. "You look happy, Mom," she said, stirring sugar into her tea. "I am," Margaret replied. "Peaceful, finally." Lily glanced around the cozy kitchen. "You've done a lot with this place. It helped me remember who I was," Margaret said with a smile. "For a long time, I thought life stopped when your heart breaks. But sometimes it just starts breathing differently." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "You sound like someone who's made peace with the past." "I think I have," Margaret said. Later, after Lily left, Margaret walked to the garden and knelt by the rose bushes Evan had helped her plant. New buds had begun to bloom. She touched one gently, thinking everything grows if you just give it time. Months rolled into a year. Evan's letters came less frequently, but that was natural. He was living fully now, chasing dreams and new beginnings. Margaret never felt abandoned. She felt fulfilled. On his birthday, she sent a simple postcard, "Keep growing." Evan, the world needs builders, not just of walls, but of hearts. 2 years later, she received a small parcel in the mail. Inside was a framed photograph, Evan standing beside a young woman with bright eyes and a calm smile. Behind them was a building site, scaffolding rising high. "We're engaged," the note read. "I wanted you to be the first to know. Thank you for believing in me when I see OULDN single quotes." But Margaret held the photo for a long moment, her fingers trembling slightly. Tears gathered, but they were the kind that came with warmth, not sorrow. "He's found his future," she whispered that night. She placed the photograph on the shelf beside her family pictures, not out of longing, but pride. The following summer, Margaret received another letter, this time an invitation. "Claire and I are getting married in August. It would mean a lot if you came." She hesitated at first. Chicago was far, and her health wasn't what it used to be. But something inside urged her to go. She hadn't traveled in years. But this felt important. So one early morning, she packed a small suitcase, put on her best blue dress, and boarded a train bound west as the train rolled through fields and small towns. She gazed out the window, memories flooding back, laughter on the porch, the sound of rain, conversations that healed old wounds. By the time she reached Chicago, she felt ready for whatever waited. The wedding was simple and beautiful, held in a small garden surrounded by white roses. When Evan saw her among the guests, his face lit up. "Margaret," he said, rushing over to hug her. "You didn't think I'd miss it, did you?" She laughed. He grinned. "You came all this way. I wouldn't have missed it for the world." Claire, the bride, joined them with a warm smile. "You must be Margaret. Evans told me so much about you." Margaret smiled, her eyes kind. "I've heard beautiful things about you too." As the ceremony began, Margaret sat quietly, watching as vows were exchanged under the golden light. She thought about all the chapters of her life, the love she'd lost, the pain she'd survived, and the peace she'd finally earned. When the couple kissed, she clapped softly, whispering, "He's home." After the reception, Evan found her sitting by a small fountain. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You already did," she replied, "by living fully." He smiled, eyes shining. "I wouldn't be here without you." Margaret shook her head. You would have found your way. I just gave you a little light when it got dark. He hesitated, then said, I still keep the rose cutting. It's growing. She smiled. Of course it is. Before leaving, Evan hugged her tightly. You'll always have a place in my story, he said, and you in mine. She replied softly. That evening, Margaret walked back to her hotel room alone. The city lights shimmered like stars brought to earth. She sat by the window, feeling both full and light. Life had come full circle. She had given love again, not the kind that binds, but the kind that frees. When she returned home to Vermont, she went straight to her garden. The roses were in bloom again, bright and full of life. She smiled, feeling the wind brush against her face, whispering something like gratitude. Margaret picked one rose, placed it in a small vase, and set it by the window beside Evan's wedding photo. She looked out at the sunset and whispered, We all find our way, don't we? Her heart, once heavy with memories, now felt open, peaceful. For the first time in years, she felt that every ending truly did hold a quiet beginning.